Joining us here in studio to unpack it all, Mr. Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst. Thank you very much, Mr. Perry, for joining us. So let's begin with your main takeaways from what we've just heard from the Premier.
You know, I think the most interesting thing in this press conference was what there wasn't, which was a defense minister and Benny Gantz by his side. Up until now, in the last 2 months of the war, since the government expanded, the three of them sort of would appear every now and then of a Saturday night, trying to present a united front, and that was visibly, noticeably, and surprisingly absent today. Maybe not so surprising, because the discussion behind the scenes in Israeli politics is when Benny Gantz will leave the coalition. Will it be in a month from now, or 2 or 3? As for what Netanyahu said, it was basically a holding pattern where he's asking for more time and asking everyone, the people of Israel, but also implicitly the White House, to be patient, saying more time is needed to defeat Hamas.
And also saying that he's fending off the international pressure.
Indeed, it was, as he usually does, I fear he was speaking largely to his base as well. He rattled the saber pretty loudly against Lebanon, or rather Hezbollah, saying twice that they will not be able to dream of the punishment Israel will visit upon them if they dare to escalate their already existing provocations, and also claimed that they're doing a lot more than the people know to discourage Hezbollah from doing that. And also, it was interesting that he specifically mentioned Iran,
right,
as a legitimate target for Israel if all of this should continue. And it's not indefensible for him to make that point, because really Iran has encircled Israel in a sort of nightmare 360 with the Houthis in the south and Hezbollah in the north and Hamas in the east, the west, really.
And one would think that the Iranian hostility is not just a problem of Israel.
Absolutely. Iran is at this point, well, partly because of Netanyahu and Trump, a nuclear threshold state with multiple terrorist proxies who have in the past not been shy about committing acts of terrorism in Europe and in South America. And of course, it's at the center of what is emerging as at risk of sounding simplistic or Bush-like, a new axis of evil, that brings in Russia, Iran, its various proxies, and increasingly China, who has been, for a country that in recent years has wanted to deepen its relationship with Israel, has been weirdly positive towards Hamas.
And by the way, a report from Israel's Channel 12 this very evening is that as part of the many weapons that the IDF soldiers have been finding in the Gaza Strip, also a massive amount of Chinese weapon in the Gaza Strip. And to that point exactly, and perhaps as a side note, you know, according to this mutually assured destruction theory of between nuclear-powered states, that the fear is not actually striking or detonating the nuclear bomb. The fear is from the bravado or the confidence that the nuclear power gives once a state in its actions, generally speaking. And in this respect, Iran already has the audacity of a nuclear state without actually getting the bomb yet.
It can make them feel invulnerable and tempt them to, accelerate and intensify the mayhem that they project around a region and indeed the world. And of course, there are big political questions here also in Europe about whether the Europeans are prepared to, if need be, really pay a price in order to isolate Iran if this should continue.
So you know, in the spirit of bidding farewell, far from a sad one, to 2023, and welcoming what we hope will be a better 2024, the future of the war, some would suggest that even the present of this war exceeds its geographical borders, but the future of the war can even go further ahead.
Yeah, there was a movie about 40 years ago called The Year of Living Dangerously. I think that very much applies to 2024.
To every single year, though, this past
but rarely as now. Because, of course, we've been discussing potential escalations around the region. You know, the Houthis, if they wanted to, could really mess up access to the Suez Canal, which is a conduit for about 30% of global container traffic. Already, the 4 or 5 major shipping companies are circumnavigating Africa, which raises insurance costs and shipping costs, messes up supply chains and risks creating inflation all around the world, which of course impacts politics in all these countries that have elections coming up. If Putin should feel like the West is distracted by the Middle East, of course he could try again to take Kiev, and around the corner are the Chinese, who, if they think Putin can get away with that, might even be tempted to attack Taiwan. And all of this can only help Donald Trump in the U.S. And right around the corner is that particular peril.
And you know, it strikes me, Mr. Perry, because only short months ago we were talking about the announcement, the groundbreaking announcement of the Biden administration on this vision of connecting India to Saudi Arabia, to Israel, to Europe. If you were mentioning the axis of evil, the axis of good, and Netanyahu move in Washington against the nuclear deal back then, using Congress to bypass the White House, and now we're saying the other way around.
It's more than a little courageous of Biden, because in supporting Israel so valiantly, he is upsetting key constituencies, the progressives, the youth, Muslims, even African Americans who are significantly more skeptical of Israel than the whites. And this is in an election year. It all points in the same direction, which is that I believe Biden would like Israel to wrap this up and be successful quickly. Or if they can't do that, then, as we know very well, they're pressing Israel to move to a different phase of the conflict that will create less damage among civilians.
But would it be more dangerous for all those involved not to end it successfully? To end it without a success?
You're assuming foresight from politicians. It's a little amusing. No, of course it would. But they cannot handle a prolonged war that kills civilians at the pace that has apparently been happening for the first 2.5 months. That is going to have to change. I believe that the Israeli government understands it too. There is talk of a third phase of the war that will be more surgical and therefore more sustainable as a long-term conflict. But also, there are many political questions in the background. Pressure in Israel is growing all the time to do more to bring back the hostages. There is some skepticism about whether the logic that military pressure alone on Hamas is going to make them relent and they'll break and they'll cough up the hostages. That hasn't borne out yet, it'll be difficult for the government to continue this way.
And yet, while this notion might get challenged, at the same time, Mr. Perry, you yourself and the common convention is that the Americans will be asking the Israelis to wrap it up sooner or later, or at least, contain its operations. So why should Hamas agree to any deal now when they know that in a few weeks the situation is going to be, quote unquote, in their benefit anyways?
There's no question that there's certain logic to Hamas trying to hold out. Everyone, I think, reasonable on the planet, including the Arab leaders, would like Israel to get to Sinwar and actually have a victory very soon, rescue the hostages, and do something reasonable the day after. What the world asks of Israel, I think, is 2 things. One, to be more careful with civilians in Gaza, and 2, to articulate a day-after plan for Gaza that is compelling and gives the Palestinians some hope. The Israeli public is not in a mood for that, frankly. Netanyahu knows this, and so there's no real demand coming from the Israeli public for it, but there is an international demand, and it would be wise to heed it, because the window of legitimacy that will enable Israel to continue the war until victory depends on just that. On appearing like their goal is not an infinite occupation of Gaza or an expulsion of the population, which is a fear that is really being discussed in the Arab world. And I mean, I tell anyone who asks me that it's completely unreasonable and is not even close to Israel's plan. But in absence of discussion that is genuine about rumors and innuendo when conspiracy theories are raging, and this is not helping Israel's legitimacy, which it needs to continue.